Okay, good morning. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the part 3 of the seminar on physical activity measurement. So this session will focus on the latest development in the field, from device-based monitoring to machine learning and methods for analyzing accelerometer data. So we are pleased to bring together both national and international researchers and to share insights. The program will also include a plenary discussion in the end. So here we have the program for today. So with 3 speakers for a break, and then we have 1 more speaker and then a plenary discussion. And the first speaker of today is Professor Bjørge Herman Hansen. He's from University of Agder and also hold a part-time 20% position at our university. He has been involved in population surveillance and methodological development of monitoring physical activity for over almost 20 years. So we're really looking forward to your talk, Bjørge.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you for an interesting topic. 40 years, trying to give an overview to some of the world leading experts in the room. It's quite scary, actually. And but the title in itself, the title in itself makes me feel a little bit old. But I've realized, as Josen said, that I've been working in this field for a very long time. And so my take on this title will be, it's a big field to cover. Lots of different, I won't say rabbit holes, but lots of different niches to go into. And each niche is a special field with tons of researchers involved in it. So I'm keeping this at an unsystematic level. And I've tried to build it as follows. So as you all know, our entire field started with questionnaires. Then came the pedometers, a measure of steps, like a measure of volume, strengths and limitations. Then came the accelerometers, which gave us an estimate of intensity. Then came the widespread use of accelerometers and the start of some population surveillance initiatives. And then something that I've called the modern era. And that consists of two different tracks. One where we utilized a lot of the studies collected earlier for longitudinal analysis on mortality and dose-response relationships and all of that, made the field take huge leaps. And then there's in parallel, the great methodological progresses and advantages made in this field, which will be maybe the focus on the rest of the day. So just a little bit of recap of where we came from. Big, famous landmark studies from Norges comparing the health of the walking ticket collectors or compared to the sedentary drivers. That study had its critiques, saying it has got nothing to do with conductors walking up and down the stairs. It's due to differences in body mass index. So they redid their analysis and adjusted for uniform size, but the findings still stuck. These findings were repeated in different populations. So typically, classifications of occupational physical activity, as Knut Erik alluded to yesterday. And this is the Paffenbarger study. And eventually the field also started to look at the effects of leisure time, physical activity. And Norway has always been a player in this field. Lots of studies could be mentioned. This is Holme Andersen's follow-up from the Oslo surveys, where a very simple 4-category questionnaire where you classify yourself as either doing mostly or having a mostly sedentary activity level, or do light, moderate, or vigorous or strenuous physical activity, showing a very clear association between these categories, with an increase in activity level, even at an older age, had a positive effect, and the benefits of physical activity were comparable to the health benefits of not smoking. So it's quite a powerful finding. But there's always the challenge that you're all well aware of, measurement error. So lots of strengths and limitations with that way of measuring physical activity. Regression dilution, that's what we observe today, that now that we have a more precise estimate of exposure, the associations become stronger. So that was a challenge. Systematic misclassification, so if you consistently overestimate something, you incorrectly classify people as, for example, being physically active. And also limited ability to provide quantitative physical activity guidelines. So then entered the pedometers, entered the stage, and there were lots of studies employing pedometers, which I will not go into, but this is a quiz. The next slide is a quiz. So this is from one of my favorite studies of all times. I really like it. I use it all the time. It's a population. Mean values, steps, 20,000 over the week. Something a little bit special with the Sunday. It's a study from Sørlandet, maybe. What's the population here? Ulf?
They are religious because of low levels of activity on Sundays. It's probably Amish, and they have high levels of the other days of the week.
Yes. This is the Bassett.
I knew it was your favorite study.
I think it's a fantastic proxy of how activity levels perhaps were back in the days, because they live without electricity and they do manual labor. Okay. But obvious limitations with pedometers. So less precise in certain populations. If you're frail and you have a slow gait, it doesn't necessarily pick up the steps. There's no intensity. And the obvious one is perhaps not all movement involves stepping or walking. But we will get back to steps. Then came the accelerometers. I think the first actigraph accelerometer was produced for the American Army for a tool to estimate energy expenditure for soldiers so that they could calculate how much food they should bring. I think that was the first how it came about. And accelerometers measure acceleration. And somebody figured out that the energy needed to produce a muscle contraction that results in a vertical acceleration, those two things are strongly associated, meaning that acceleration is a good proxy for physical activity. And these were the very first monitors. And I think this picture is courtesy of Elin Kolle. Is that true? This is Oslo, maybe 2005? Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And these first ones were very different from the ones we are using today. Completely different inside of the monitor, and lots of, if you've been working with these, you know how tedious it could be to control for calibration, and they would drift all over the place. But it's important to keep in mind the whole rationale for why we use accelerometers as a measure of physical activity once we move into the more modern areas of this field. With the counts came the cut points. This is the Friedsen, the background for the Friedsen cut points. So what you see here is individuals walking faster and faster on a treadmill while wearing an accelerometer, and a measure of the indirect calorimetry. So what you see here is we typically define moderate intensity as, for example, 3 times energy expenditure at rest. So the metabolic equivalent is the if you're here, you're working at 4 times your resting energy expenditure. So here you are at 3 mats. Then you go to the regression line, and you go down, and this is the cutoff, the count cutoff for moderate intensity. That's how cut points work. And we started to get software for dealing with this accelerometer data. This is Uffe, is short for Ulf Eklund. He published his software in 1903, so it's a big field. But this led to, so the accelerometers exploded in use, and one amazing study is the European Youth Heart Study. They did in early 2000 what now lots of international initiatives are trying to do, figure out to harmonize data collection across countries. And the challenge of studying the relationships between health and children is that children are not small adults. They don't have hard endpoints, but here they showed a very clear associations between higher physical activity and a better risk profile when it comes to cardiometabolic health. So the European Youth Heart Study was a game changer and a very early user of accelerometers. After the accelerometers gained widespread use, there were harmonization efforts starting to appear. So this is a slide from the International Children's Accelerometry database, which pooled existing studies on device-based physical activity and health outcomes in children, and showed convincingly that higher moderate to vigorous physical activity by children and adolescents was associated with better cardiometabolic risk factors, regardless of the amount of sedentary time. So also a landmark paper. Then stage 3, which I have, don't maybe not quote me on this, but I've called it population surveillance. But eventually, the bigger surveillance initiatives started appearing. And the first one was the accelerometer part of the NHANES study in the US. Published a paper in 2007 where they estimated prevalence of meeting guidelines in the US. And the prevalence estimate, so 50%, 30% in these age groups, then it basically our bottom line was that these estimates were really low, like they were surprisingly low. So that caused a big stir. And us, as all of you know, it's very deriving that big signal down to a yes or no on a guideline is very challenging. But this was a big paper, and it showed that only 5% of US adults met physical activity guidelines. And we had a similar paper from Sweden, here being very transparent in different ways of operationalizing the guidelines. 50% meeting guidelines, but as you see, this is the way they operationalized it back then, at least 30 minutes per day, which is not quite the way we do it today. If they add the continuous minutes criteria, which was apparent or was a thing then, it dropped significantly, and then a different ways. And you can see the problem here. So one device, one signal, one method, vastly different estimates. Then Norway entered the scene with 9 and 15-year-olds. You've seen these data all of yesterday. This is the first prevalence estimates for adults in Norway. You can see here that 30 minutes of daily moderate to vigorous physical activity in bouts of 8 to 10 minutes. Oops. And the estimates were approximately 20%, so 1 in 5. So that number stuck in Norwegian white papers and stuff like that, 1 in 5. Then, once there was enough or not enough. Once there were more surveillance studies, harmonization efforts came about there as well. And this is a summary of what's available in Scandinavia. So moderate to vigorous physical activity, Finland, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, children, adults, and older adults. But this is not a harmonized effort, so there are protocol differences here. So you wouldn't really expect to see such a difference between countries that are quite similar, but it's probably due to methodological differences. With these population studies, we realized a couple of things. We realized that there were huge differences between what we thought and what we now know, so self-reported versus measured. Big summaries of sedentary time using questionnaires, approximately 5 hours per day. Looking at the accelerometer data, that number is a lot higher. This is a paper also I like very much, Jostein's paper, showing that measured adherence to guidelines, approximately 50% of what you get using a questionnaire. So we realized all of these things. And does it matter? Yes, it does matter. And I love this slide. It's very informative, and it's what lies behind all these newer studies, where you see if you compare the same research question in the same population, and you use two different exposures, so self-reported exposure variable and objectively measured exposure variable, you get two very different risk reductions. So a lot powerful when we use accelerometry as the exposure. And we also became maybe even more aware of this problem, that even though it's, well, we don't use the term objective measures anymore, we use device assessed, and that's because of this. Even though it's objective in a way, it's so dependent on the choices you make as a researcher that you can almost end up wherever you want to end up and still back it up by literature. So that's a problem, and we're still working on that standardization issue. Okay, then came the modern era, and I've defined it as we started to utilize the ongoing big cohort studies, pool them to look at those response associations with a lot greater statistical power. And it feels it's a little bit scary to try and explain this figure with I don't know, maybe 5 of the authors in the room. But what was new here is that the dose response is stronger and it kicks in at lower levels of physical activity. So only by comparing the second least active group to the reference group, the first quartile 1, it's a massive risk reduction, a lot bigger than what we see from comparable studies based on questionnaires. And we get these very nice dose response curves. Maximum risk reduction occurs at about 20 minutes, which is remarkably close to the guidelines. Okay, and the most recent paper is the very recent Lancet paper, which has such a beautiful message from a public health perspective. It will most definitely make a big impact or a big dent in the physical activity public health work. So final slide here, or second last slide. So trying to sum up the different areas we've gone through. We've passed this, and we're now in an area with a lot more emphasis on raw data, new analytical approaches, and we've gone from simple estimates of volume to more advanced classifications of behavior. And now, moving forward, we see a lot more use of raw acceleration. So we're moving away from the brand-specific counts into more, what do you call it, monitor-agnostic estimates of accelerometer signals. So MAD, MIMS, and ENMO, you might be aware of those. Studies have, with Hunt maybe leading that field, has employed multiple sensors in huge samples, adding complex machine learning approaches to get type of activity, in addition to estimates of volume, which is really, really interesting. There are huge ongoing efforts. We have Aiden here today to perhaps show us something from the UK Biobank, which is a tremendous resource. There's ongoing initiatives, prospective consortiums like the ProPass. We have the Adult Accelerometer Consortium, and we have plans on various new consortia. So we'll be hearing about advanced analytical approaches, typically trying to derive type, maybe more than estimates of volume. And also, finally, integration of other signals. I mean, the integration of a GPS signal is not by any means new in this field, but it's starting to become maybe more integrated in sensors, because that's been a tedious work trying to match, for example, GPS signals with the accelerometers. But there's lots of ongoing initiative. This is a doctoral network focusing on advanced behavior and data analysis called Lambda, so look out for Lambda results in the coming future, and we'll be hearing about machine learning work from NTNU. That will be very exciting. So try to summarize 40 years of this field. This was my take on trying to summarize this. We haven't landed on one method to rule them all. We're still dealing with standardization issues, and also realize that different research questions obviously calls for different approaches. But if we could move towards some sort of standardization for example, surveillance purposes, that would be very, very good. And finally, it's very interesting that perhaps the next revision of the guidelines will say something about, I think that is absolutely brilliant. Okay, looking forward to the talks. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bjørge, for a great overview of the field. I think we will wait with questions and see if we have time after Aiden's presentation before the break. So please sum those up. So the next speakers are Johan and Ole. So they are researchers at the Norwegian Public Health Institute, both with their masters in sports sciences from NIH. And also I should mention that Johan will soon start his PhD at our institution in August. So the floor is yours.
Thank you. Now? Perfect. Thank you very much. My name is Johan, and along with Ole, we will present a bit on the pilot we're currently working on. I love that you call us researchers, but we're actually research assistant on this. But thank you. But it's on harmonizing a device-based physical activity monitoring system across Europe. A real tongue twister.
All right, so before I start talking about monitoring, which is the working package we're on, I'm going to just shortly read up here what Joint Action Prevent NCD is all about. It is an EU co-funded joint action running since January 2024. And there's 100 partners involved across 25 different countries. And the aim is to strengthen the coordinated prevention of cancer and non-communicable diseases. Yeah, so we want to tackle shared risk factors, reduce social inequalities, and build a common evidence base across member states. And if you just go back one, Johan, there's 10 working packages involved here. You can go to the website and see the whole scope of this. However, I'll go along now and just start on our working package, which aims to harmonize a study protocol to measure physical activity, sedentary behavior, and sleep simultaneously across 7 European countries. As you already know from yesterday's session, we already have this system implemented in Norway through ungKan and ungKan. However, the point here is to establish a shared, harmonized surveillance system for key health indicators in Europe.
There are 7 countries participating in the pilot, which is led and co-led by Norway and Finland, respectively. Oh, Finland and Norway, respectively.
All right, so all countries have a predefined sample. Here in Norway, we have Oslo and Akershus area. And the participants are of working age. And what we've done here in Norway is we've drawn 5,000 random people all across Norway. And we use the Norwegian population register, so folkehelse, which means we get all the info we need about who these people are, their names, their address, their registered government ID, everything we need to contact these people. And we use accelerometers and questionnaires throughout this project.
I'd just like to add that all countries aim for at least 500 participants, and here in Norway we're limited to only Oslo and Akershus. So all the participants receive 2 accelerometers, namely the activity, so a bit different from the ungKan studies. They are instructed to wear 1 monitor on the wrist 24/7 and 1 on their hip during daytime only. And here you can see the current setup we're using to the right, although we have slightly altered the hip-borne cradle to an arguably better design. But all participants are at least instructed to wear the devices for 7 consecutive days. And we will be testing out different minimum wear time criteria to find a good balance between both sample size and measurement reliability. And the levels of physical activity, sedentary time, and sleep will be estimated using the GDIR package, which is made namely for our coding language, as it is open source, free to use for all the 7 countries, which supports a highly reproducible and analytical approach.
All right, over to the subjective measures, which is a questionnaire based on the European Health Interview Survey. We have included some country-specific items in here. However, most countries, they use the same questions and translate them into their respective language. We use Nettskjema here in Norway, which is GDPR compliant. Data is stored securely. Participants can log in easily through their bank ID and passwords. And included domains gives us info about their alcohol use, for instance, smoking and tobacco use, and self-reported physical activity, sedentary behavior, and so forth. Data collection takes place through 10 waves, which Joan and I split into. So I get 250 people to contact. Joan gets his half. And what happens is they all get an email, which has been carefully crafted. So they get absolutely all the info they need with links to the consent form, questionnaire, and attachments showing them what the project is all about. That is followed by SMS to their phone, which tells them that we will call them from a 21+ number, which people usually are skeptical to receive calls from. However, then they will know who we are, why we're calling, and there's no links in that SMS, so it's safe. That is followed by us calling them and telling them about the project. Hopefully we'll get their consent. And then we send out some study materials to them, like this, with an envelope inside, with all the info they need, and the accelerometers. When they're finished, they put this inside here, deliver it to the store, and then it's sent back to us. So it's as easy as humanly possible to return the materials. However, as many of you maybe know, it's not that easy anyways. And then we process the data, and we send the personalized report to each participant back, which we hope is an incentive for them to join.
We've currently completed 4 waves and have, as of now, seen a response rate sitting right below 60%. But out of the responders, 4 out of 10 chooses to participate. But the overall inclusion rate or participation rate out of the possible sample is sitting right under 23%, which for all waves has been less than we've seen yesterday from the ungKan studies. But as you see, there's hopefully an upwards going trend here. Can you guess which month this was? Right, that was January. So it went down a bit again, but we've done a few adjustments from the 3rd wave, or I'll call it a couple of lessons learned. As for recruitment, we've simplified the consent procedures quite a bit by allowing the participants both to give their consents digitally through BankID, but also in writing. If they agree over the phone, we send the equipment out, allowing them to write their consents in both ways, which allows us to do the distribution quite a bit faster, and we've also received quite positive feedback from participants enjoying to have both options available. As Ole mentioned, we now, after wave 3, where we saw the boost, started with SMS pre-notifications, where we both ensure that the participants feel safe that the email isn't phishing of any kind, and they're also quite more responsive for phone contact. And we also, from wave 3, started following up the participants quite a bit earlier after they were expected to wear the monitors. So 10 days after we would like them to start wearing them, we reach out and ensure that they actually do it. So if they haven't started yet, they still manage at least 4 valid days. If not, we can also redistribute devices earlier, resulting in a far smoother workflow. But the actual monitoring, we've what is quite a bottleneck as to the amount of devices. So we started out with 200 devices, and if we only measured at one sensor location, it would likely be sufficient. But for our workflow, it gave a quite big bottleneck. So we were luckily able to borrow 80 additional monitors from Trondheim, which has now loosened things up.
Suffering from success.
Yeah, suffering from the success. The custom design belt Ole showed has been a quite long process, including Ole's many tailor visits and a 3D printed cradle. But it's now made the hip-worn devices much more usable and durable. And lastly, the sampling frequency of 100 Hz has proven to be quite a limitation on battery capacity, as well as making the file sizes probably 3 times larger than they need to be. So we would recommend adjusting the sampling frequency to the study protocol's actual needs. But this was a compromise, which we could talk about another time.
Yeah. We're nearing completion of the data collection, which we'll finish in June. We aim for 500, which we will reach. However, we set a goal of 1,000, so wish us luck the next 2 months. So we'll see how that goes. The report will be delivered next year, within March. So looking forward to that.
And then we will evaluate success based on both the participant rate, but also the amount of valid data from said participants. And this has to be considered up against the time needs we see and staffing requirements. But if successful, this can be upscaled to a harmonized monitoring system across Europe. And lastly, I'd just like to add that we've been sort of harsh on the fact that using 2 monitors can be a limitation, but it does also have some positive effects, such as allowing us to directly compare placement sites and to better understand how the location actually affects the data. And data is beautiful, so it will be interesting to explore how possible differences in wear time and time spent at various intensities will occur. This is our organization, and we're a bit over time, so you can read it yourself.
Perfect. Thank you for a very nice presentations, research assistants, Johan and Ole. We will keep some questions for after the next speaker. So then it's a very great pleasure for me to invite Aiden to the stage. He's a professor of biomedical informatics at the University of Oxford. He is focusing on advancing device-based methods and machine learning. He also plays a leading role in international collaboration on monitored technologies and also serves as an advisor for the World Health Organization on the use of wearables in surveillance. So the floor is yours, Aidan.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you so much, Justin. Just let me get this hooked up right. Brilliant. I've got my other slide set here. I need to switch the two around because I unhelpfully sent two slide sets to Tom Daniel this morning. And the other one might be a little bit later, is it?
Just give us 1 second.
Okay. Sorry, that was my fault, because I unhelpfully sent two different slide sets. So we're having the Q&A with Juana and Ulf a little bit later, so I just got some other slides for that. That's okay, take your time. And I do want to say a huge thank you to Tom Daniel and for the organisation of this, and to Ulf and others, and for inviting me as well. So, because I'm really excited to come here, because in my view, then a lot of the accelerometry work being done here in Norway really is world leading, and the types of work that Ulf, Jakob, and others are doing. I think of who are some of the best physical activity epidemiologists in the world, and I often think it's Ayman Lee and Ulf then too. So I'm very excited to come here then to present to some of my own heroes as well. That's okay. And then I should say then, just by introduction then, so I lead a team of about 20 people then in Oxford who, like myself, are unhealthily obsessed with the use of wearables in large-scale studies. So probably about half our team are from computer science, statistics, machine learning backgrounds. Then we've got a few statistical geneticists in there, a few epidemiologists, and then, of course, we collect some data on validation studies, a little bit like what Johan and colleagues were just presenting there too. So, and one key thing for us then is trying to make those data sets open and freely available as well. So I'm a very big proponent that there's loads of other people out there that will come up with much better ideas than me. So at least if I make my data available, others will come up with much more clever ways to analyze it than what I'll think of myself. So over the next maybe 20, 25 minutes or so, I'll just share some of the work that we do at Oxford. It's unashamedly talking about a lot of our own work rather than the work of others. And as I said, there's lots of other fantastic work going on in this space. So in the UK, there's a lot of excitement around wearables. In fact, back in the summer time of last year, our National Health Service produced a report called Fit for the Future. So it's essentially the 10-year vision for healthcare in the UK as part of the National Health Service. And as part of that, there are what they call 5 big bets on transformative technologies of the future. And one of those 5 big bets is wearables, as you can see up in the top right-hand corner. So there's a lot of national emphasis around how can we integrate wearables into not only care pathways, but also in terms of thinking about prevention as well. So there's a lot of interest, not just within the physical activity or sleep epidemiology communities, now more widely clinical biomedical communities have got a huge interest in this space. And there are a couple of biases that I bring into this talk that you'll have to take into account as I go throughout. The first is self-report, I think, is fantastic for surveillance purposes, but quite generally, I don't believe what people tell me. And what maybe motivates this, and I think surely there must be a better way. So as with the UK Biobank, I'll talk a little bit later about how we measure sleep duration. So this is in 66,000 people. They were asked, how long do I think I sleep at night? And then the device was measuring maybe how long I actually sleep, or closer to how long I actually sleep at night. So this is deciles and 66,000 people. So over here we got about 6,500 people who think they sleep 12 hours a night. And then over on this side, we've got another 6,500 people who think they sleep 3 hours per night. Then if I kind of look at the estimates of both of these, the device thinks they sleep maybe just under 8 hours per night. So the correlation between both measurements is around 0.2 for sleep duration. So I'm thinking, if I can get a device-based measurement, I would really quite prefer that than relying on the self-reported information. Now, of course, both do give you different views of the puzzle, but the scientist within me says, well, how much signal can we squeeze out of a device-based measurement, or can we get a device-based measurement in as many people as possible? And the second bias then I take is that if I can, I want a really large study. So this is probably the slide that motivated the creation of the UK Biobank. So it was from a prospective studies collaboration. This was an analysis in about 1 million people about 25 years ago, looking at the relationship then between systolic blood pressure and ischemic heart disease, and on the y-axis. And at this point then the authors were trying to see what the relationship was like within individual age groups. So here, if you had, for example, a Framingham heart study, a sample size of about 5,000 people, it's very hard to make any sense of this particular information. But as you go up to 50,000 people, or then 500,000 people, you almost get these engineering scale diagrams then, whereby you get very much clarity then by having large numbers. And you can see that, yes, higher levels of systolic blood pressure are associated with a higher risk of ischemic heart disease, but particularly so in the older age groups, because the y-axis is on a log scale here. So that's one of my biases that I take into account. I want really large studies of device measurements so that they're associated with incident disease outcomes. And then finally, as I said, the other bias that I have is that I really do believe that sharing of data and methods is vital for scientific progress, because other people are going to come up with much better ideas on how to analyze data, or new and clever uses of methods that I wouldn't have thought of myself. So essentially, a lot of the work I present here today, we've got a GitHub page, so that all of these software packages to measure step counts or sleep or activities of daily living, so they're all open source here, and for people who love Python, then you can just download it very easily as a Python package. And a lot of the variables we create, we return them back into the UK Biobank resource, so that the epidemiologist who does not want to process terabytes of raw sensor data doesn't have to do so, that they can instead piggyback on top of some summary metrics. And I do realize those metrics do not become immediately available in the Biobank resource. They've usually got about a year's review period, and it goes into a pipeline, but it eventually gets there. So some of the studies then that certainly influence my thinking then are, of course, the UK Biobank then, so how can I get large sample sizes then? So the UK Biobank, obviously, another one of my very favorite studies in the world right now. It doesn't give raw acceleration data, but it's the All of Us study in the US then, who has given Fitbits. This figure is in 30,000 people who was linked up with genetic data there, but it's about 60,000 individuals then have a Fitbit measurement, multiple years measurement for each individual person. So this is one of my favorite studies. Hunt study, another one of my very favorite studies around some and other fantastic efforts. One I want to highlight then is the China Kadoorie Biobank. We've actually collected data in about 20,000 people. Again, this is one for just a genetic analysis that was just a 14,000 person overlap. But there are lots of large-scale resources out there now, many of which have raw accelerometer data, which then becomes just a fantastic playground for someone like myself, who thinks of myself as a data scientist and a methods developer. And of course, we do have to take biases into account when analysing this data or interpreting the data. And the first one I quite like to show is in the UK Biobank. We had got a measurement on about 100,000 people, but we had to ask many more people than that to take part. Now, the Biobank's already a biased sample, so 9 million people were given an invite letter in the post to get the 500,000 sample. So it's already a biased sample, the UK Biobank. Then we sent out an email invite to about 250,000 people to see would they like to take part in this accelerometer activity monitoring study. And it's a lot of fun when you look at, when we sent the question to people, we've got a group of people who said, yeah, I'm happy to take part, to wear the device. And then we've got obviously the people then who declined to respond or did not respond or said no actively. And it's quite fun then if you look at the analysis. Since we asked the question, there's about 9 years of follow-up, and then Charlie Harper here looked at the cumulative mortality in both groups. So you can see that if you're ever asked to wear a wearable, you should definitely say yes, because your mortality profile would be quite a bit lower. Now, of course, it's the types of people who say yes to a question such as that, but I think it's a very fun way of showing that there's certainly it's a healthier, more active group that take part even within the very biased sample that is the UK Biobank too. And then, of course, one can do any form of analysis in this. And the UK Biobank, I think, is only becoming truly helpful now because it's about 10 years since the data was collected. So we're starting to accrue enough incident events, I think, for interesting epi-analysis. And I could pick any number of examples of data in this. This is just one recent one, very much inspired by the type of work that Ulf does and trying to look at essentially joint or stratified analysis. And we were looking at Laura Brocklebank here then was looking at sleep and physical activity and risk of incident cardiovascular disease. So I should have put the total number of events. This is after about 8-9 years of follow-up. I think it's about 3,000-4,000 incident cardiovascular events. And essentially what Laura was looking at was step count, sleep duration, and then looking at the interaction then of those 3 different groups. So you can see then we have, where's our reference group? So our reference group then was people at a kind of a medium level of sleep with a high step count. So then if you go to the other end, then if you've got a very short sleep, very low step count, you've got a much higher hazard ratio. But you can see, I think, generally it's the step count has got a stronger looking association than the sleep with the incident outcomes. But the part I find quite interesting then is that if you've got a high, which one was it? Sorry. My interpretation of this was that physical activity is more important than sleep, but that you can't, if you've got, for example, a short sleep duration but a high step count, you still have a slightly higher risk. So my interpretation was that you can't outrun a bad sleep, but that physical activity is still, I think, much more strongly associated with incident cardiovascular disease outcomes than is sleep. And the beauty of the UK Biobank, and this is very similar to the types of data sets that you have here in Norway then, is that linkage to electronic healthcare records, whereby essentially you can pick your favorite disease under the sun then, as to try and see how are variations in activity associated with that outcome. I'll not go through these, but yeah, you can very much pick your favorite disease outcome. And I argue that was just talked about there just earlier this morning on regression dilution then, is that the associations that we're seeing already are much stronger than what we've seen with the self-reported physical activity questionnaires, The device estimates possibly still might be a bit of an underestimate because we're just getting a 7-day snapshot measurement on individuals. So there's still going to be measurement error around that. So Harry Zizou then in the team looked at, within the UK Biobank, we collected additional data on 3,000 people to get a repeated 7-day measurement. So 3 years later, they had a repeated 7-day measurement, and we just went to town because then we asked them 3 months again, and another 3 months later, and another 3 months later. So they've actually got 4 repeated measurements. So first thing I think is really good news. If I take, say, let's take the worst of these, and so say maybe up to 4 years later, then if I'm looking at people under the age of 60, then if I take essentially my within-person regression dilution coefficient is 0.68. So when looking at values around 0.7, that's actually pretty good. It's equivalent to blood biomarkers that are kind of measured levels, and we look at repeated measurements in those. Not as high as BMI, which I think is around 0.9, much better than, as you can imagine, self-reported diet, for example, which might be around 0.2, 0.3. So it's so we got I think a very strong measurement from the 7 days, but it's not perfect. So what Harry then further looked at then was, this is a bit messy and hard to look at. So then if we have our usual dose-response association in the light-colored here, we can see that our hazard ratio per 4,000 steps higher is a 0.87, but then we take into account the regression dilution for that and the measurement error from HIT. We can actually then see that we actually get a stronger association, a hazard ratio moving from 0.87 down to 0.8 by taking into account that measurement error. So I think this is a really neat method then that I'd like to see incorporated in future biobank analyses then too, taking into account this measurement error. And in fact, we could probably even go to town even more so then, because as I said, one of my favorite studies in the world right now is the All of Us study in the US. So Evelyn and my team spends half her time working with the All of Us team. So she's located at the NIH campus in the US and spends half her time at Oxford. So then what Evelyn did was she looked at the first essentially 30,000 participants who got linked electronic healthcare record data. She's looked at essentially all the diseases under the sun on that then to try and see how is device-measured step count, this is Fitbit-measured step count, associated with incident disease outcomes. And now this is a little bit of a messy one. Let's look at type 2 diabetes. If I've got the yellow measurement here, I've got a random day. So if I take a random day in my population, my hazard ratio might be, I'm not going to even guess that number, but you can see the hazard ratio, how far away it is in the null. Then if I've got a week of measurement, I get a stronger association. If I go up to a month, I've got an even stronger association. Or if I've got a year's worth of measurement, I've got an even stronger association again. So what Evelyn looked at is if you've got a day's worth of step count association, you might get association with 17 incident diseases, whereas if you've got a year's worth of measurement in people, that then goes up to 37 incident disease associations found. As you can see, there's a whole load of prevalent diseases in which it's associated with. So again, 7 days is very pragmatic, but if you can get even longer periods of measurement, I think there's a lot to gain from that. And the main thing I wanted to talk about then today was around machine learning methods, because up to now then we're getting relatively simple volume estimates from the device measurement. But if I think of whether I'm sitting or walking or driving, there's going to be a very unique pattern or signature to those. So there's some form of signal processing I can do then to see the patterns or signatures that indicate if I'm walking versus driving versus sitting or standing. And of course, in the past, we've had a very pragmatic approach taken to that. If I would just combine the three signals together into a vector magnitude, and then I would pick a threshold in the y-axis that seems to approximate or differentiate fairly well between if a person's doing moderate activity or sedentary activity or light activity. But then I would argue that there's a lot of signal we're throwing away from that, so then might we be able to improve the assessment or classification of those behaviors? yeah, there are different types of ground truths. So the one we use in Oxford, we quite like these wearable cameras that take first-person point of view images, and essentially we view these as reference measurement tools. So we're never going to send thousands of cameras to people in the UK biobank, but we can in smaller validation data sets. The idea then is that you wear the camera where what the person is doing is generally bleeding obvious, and you combine it then with the wrist-borne accelerometer that you can send out to your tens of thousands of participants. And we get some very lucky interns then just to go through each and every image and to say what type of activity a person is doing. So it's very good for behavioral classifications, probably not as good, I would argue, for, or I would say, for physiological constructs such as MVPA time. So it's certainly a weakness to it. So how might we have taken computational approaches in this before? I'm going to frustratingly go from bottom to top on this slide. So I've got my input data, my raw acceleration. I'll probably draw a window of some sort around it, let's say a 30-second window. The reason we go 30 seconds, it corresponds just to the granularity of our reference measurements in the camera. And then I would pick out all my favorite time and frequency domain features. You can imagine the mean of the signal, the median of the signal, some Fourier transforms of that as well. I would then put them into my favorite classifier. A few years ago, that would have been a random forest model. So then it would say, oh, based on these statistical properties of the x being greater than value, this value and the y standard deviation being below that value, oh, probably means that they're sitting or they're walking or they're biking. And then a really nice property then for the machine learning then is we can take account of the time dependency. So then the intuition is if for every 30 seconds the classifier says I'm sleeping, sleeping, bike riding, sleeping, sleeping, it's unlikely I went for a 30-second bike ride in the middle of the night. So the hidden Markov model beautifully smooths over that. So this really does add quite a bit of extra performance to the classification methods. So that was great. They worked pretty well, but you're always saying, the question in mind we always have is, these features, I'm making guesses as to what might best represent movement properties from the data. Is there a better way? So now I want to talk about what's my favorite method in the world right now, which is self-supervised learning. Essentially think of it as ChatGPT, but for wearables. So not for language, but for sensors. So the idea is that the data sets with the cameras, I can only give those to maybe hundreds of people. So my labeled data sets are still quite small, whereas you've got huge data sets like NHANES, UK Biobank, the Norwegian data sets here, but then you don't have the label of what they're doing every 30 seconds. But is there some way I can learn from those large unlabeled data sets? So the intuition then is if I get, say, Ulf was a UK Biobank participant, I might take 10 seconds of his data. Is there something I could learn from that? So then I can do some deliberate perturbations to that data. I can reverse it around, or I can stretch it out, or I can add some permutations to it. So then I'm given a neural network a challenge of, can you now guess if this data is in its normal form, its reversed form, its permuted form, or its time-warped form? And the idea is that if I do that across 100,000 UK Biobank participants, each of their 10-second periods, that's 7 billion training samples. Can I force a neural network to learn out some features that are, sounds very grand, fundamental to human motion dynamics, that can then help me do better, or it helps me better identify what features to extract from the data. So that's kind of the general premise of it. And there are other methods that we'll hear about a bit later here with the team in Trondheim do fantastic work then on a slightly different way of self-learning from the data. There's teams in Cambridge that do fantastic work as well. So there's a few alternative methods to this, but the fundamental is, can I learn, or essentially, can I learn from data that is not labeled? But then I can do so at huge scale to learn and pull out some more features. Does it work? Remarkably well, I would say. So this is and across actually device locations, tasks and populations. This is an Oxford data set that is open for anyone that would like to use it. In the past, if I would have used a traditional neural network, I would have this F1 score, but taking into account the self-supervised learning. So what I should have explained was you have your neural network diagram, and the idea then is that I've trained it to see as a signal in its normal form, its permuted form, or its time-warped form. But then what I can do is I can essentially retrain the network. I don't need to look at these stages too much because it's done all the hard work to identify what are the features to take out. But then I can adapt and retrain the model, the final layer here, then to say as a person in moderate activity or light activity or sedentary behavior, or I could even say, are they awake, sleep and REM stage, sleep and non-REM stage, or I can retrain it yet again to say as a person moving normally, moving like they've got Parkinson's disease, or moving like they're in the prodromal state of Parkinson's disease. So it's a very flexible model that can be used for a variety of downstream tasks. So it's just a new way of extracting out features. So essentially then it's been retrained in different scenarios for human activity recognition tasks in kind of free living or in the laboratory or in people in this state, a case for people with Parkinson's disease, and in all cases it does seem to improve on what we believe was the prior state of the art around that. And even, I said it generalized across populations. And my favorite paper, I'm just going to show you, is actually a team in Berkeley that are doing activity recognition, not in humans, but in polar bears. So they, essentially what they do, it's actually quite similar to human studies. First of all, they shoot the polar bear with a dart, and then they put on a accelerometer gyroscope and a camera. So you can see we've got the camera information here. And essentially that the polar bear go off and do what it would like then, a free living type scenario, and at the end then I think they shoot another dart at it. So maybe that might be a way to increase compliance in our future studies, and we can shoot darts at participants, but to get them hooked up with devices. So it's a lot of fun. And then what they're doing then, the team in Berkeley, was in the polar bear, then they've got, essentially their labels are not MVPA light sedentary, but they are, as its head shaking, is it rolling around, is it grooming itself, or is it walking? And the team in Berkeley then did was, first of all, they did the traditional approaches looking at polar bear only data, and they had an F1 score of 0.23. And then what the team did was they said, oh, we see that model in the UK biobank in humans. Could we take that, because it's trying to get some features fundamental to human motion, and use that to give me a heads up, and I just retrain that final layer then for in my polar bear Pacific data. When they did that, then the F1 score goes up from 0.23 to 0.68, and they didn't quite stop there. Then they looked at 9 different species. I guess one's a bit cheating than humans, but we have got whales, turtles, rattlesnakes, etc. And across the 9 species, then, when they take the traditional neural network approach, their F1 score is 0.5. Take the UK biobank pre-trained human data to give you a heads up. F1 score goes up from 0.5 up to almost 0.8. So it's one of my most exciting methods out there, and I think there's many ways to improve it and make it even better and more robust, these models. But even just by us scratching the surface, I think there's a huge amount of promise in this area. Then how might this be helpful? Just to give a couple of snapshots. I guess we could have done this before, but it's using the self-supervised learning methods, and we can use 24-hour composition analysis and looking at kind of inferences of time spent in moderate MVPA versus light intensity activity. And we look at cardiovascular disease. There seems to be a stonking great association. But if we go over to cancer, the intensity does not really seem as important with respect to incident cancer outcomes. So yes, total volumes of activity are associated with incident cancer outcomes, but not that we can see kind of simulations of reallocating time from light intensity activity to moderate to vigorous intensity activity. Other examples then have been retrained for sleep stages. So it's very hard from on the wrist to try and determine if a person's in REM sleep or non-REM sleep. So the performance we get is okay for wake versus REM versus non-REM, but not perfect there too. So we've certainly got to take that. It was actually quite far from random, but it's also reasonably far from being near perfection. But we still couldn't help ourselves in looking at, for example, a genome-wide association study against these different sleep traits, and there does seem to be a stonking great signal in this chromosome 2 then that indicates a switching effect from non-REM sleep to REM sleep of about, I think, 8 or 9 minutes per night. And again, it just shows that it can be used for a variety of different tasks, and I know other people come up with better ideas on how to analyze this data than we will. And then just one last example then to show is around risk prediction. Again, I said the method could be retrained to see if a person is moving like they've got Parkinson's disease versus not. So we went off to a separate data set of a few hundred people who've got Parkinson's disease versus prodromal stage of Parkinson's versus healthy controls. Then applied that in the UK biobank data set and people who we believed were healthy at the original measurement, but went on to develop and to see who went on to develop Parkinson's disease. If you've got your age, sex, classic demographic risk factors, your CEAS index score is just below 0.8. Polygenic risk doesn't really add much. If I've got a simple overall activity metric like vector magnitude, that does add quite a bit. But then if we looked at essentially within the walking episodes and applying the self-supervised learning and to see, are there some movement characteristics like a person who has Parkinson's disease? Taking that into account then gives quite a big shift in the C index, almost up to 0.9 then to identify for risk prediction future Parkinson's disease diagnoses. And one thing for this study, actually, was that we'd really love some external validation data. So if anyone knows of another large data set out there that has got well-characterized incident Parkinson's disease, I'd really love to hear about that, because we really want to see, does this method really work in another population? Where are things going next? Just to give a couple of last thoughts then. So a very exciting study, I think, is within the UK Biobank, is that we've collected chest-worn cardiac monitoring data in 35,000 people. So chest-worn patch collecting data, 250 hertz ECG, 35 hertz triaxial accelerometer. So we've just finished up a data set description paper led by Stefan here. So one of the things we're looking at is kind of the circadian variation in this case atrial fibrillation, but also I think with our physical activity hat on, the combination of the ECG and it's kind of a bit like going back to the future again to the active heart work, etc. But I think we can get a better assessment of MVPA time and also sleep and sleep stages by having the combination of the physiological plus the physical signals. I'll skip that other example. And then one thing that there are two things that keep me awake at night. The first is how much can we trust the performance of these algorithms that we're mostly developing in high-income settings? How will they work in China or in rural India or rural South Africa? Because when I mentioned before, these certainly the random forest models, when we applied these in our camera data set in Oxford, the MVPA score seemed okay. But then when we took it off to rural China, using the same type of study design, etc., the performance was shockingly bad. Now, the cut point actually might be a little bit more insulated against this, but certainly with the machine learning method, my hypothesis is that when it was training data in Oxford, it thought MVPA is just cycling in leafy Oxfordshire or running. But then when it goes off to the rural farms in China, it's never seen this type of behavior before. So I think we really need validation data sets in different parts of the world and different populations so that the machine learning methods can actually be more robustly trained and more robustly validated. So this is something that concerns me a lot. And then the other thing that concerns me just epidemiologically is that the vast majority of the current device evidence comes from, as Ulf said, the UK Biobank or other high-income setting cohorts. But we really need, I think, desperately need more large-scale device collection efforts in other parts of the world. So we're currently trying to get studies up and going in rural India, in Bangladesh as well, and then also in rural South Africa. The sample sizes aren't going to be as big as the UK Biobank, but then there are unfortunately very high mortality rates in those populations. So we're aiming for about 10,000 in each, and got some funding in some of them and trying to get more funding in others. But I passionately believe we need more evidence in lower to middle income settings. So second to last slide is that I hope I've convinced you that self-supervised machine learning, time series machine learning, is a really exciting new method and can be used, for example, in the types of studies that were just showcased earlier. We're trying to see, might there be a way to reconcile between wrist and hip? These methods might, I think, be a really good, or certainly worth looking at. And I think, yeah, to enable the next leap forward, we need, really do need validation data sets globally in different settings, different populations. As well, we need these wearable measurements embedded in global biobanks, and that will, I think, in turn then really see lots of new work then around new foundation models and partnership with industry and sensor developers. And final slide, if you are interested in any of this and learning more and doing some hands-on Python, GPU coding, etc., we run a short course in Oxford that will be in September of this year. So if you or anyone in your networks might feel this would be useful, please do share it with others. And thank you very much for the invite to speak here again. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aidan, for a great talk. So then we are a few minutes left for break. So both Aidan's presentations and Ola and Johan's presentations and Bjørge's presentation is open for some questions or comments. Anyone? Bjørge.
Thank you very much. I'm not very familiar with the machine learning field, at least not to this extent. So I don't understand how you in the self-supervised world, how you go from traits in a signal to saying anything about what that signal actually is or represents.
Mm-hmm. You don't actually. Yes, it is uninterpretable, and I've often said that if I see a similar level of performance with an uninterpretable method versus a simple linear logistic regression, I would always prefer to use the linear logistic regression. But if the new uninterpretable method clearly performs a lot better, especially in external validation data sets, I'm willing to give up some interpretability on that. I feel comfortable with that for human activity recognition. If I'm looking at exposure outcome associations epidemiologically, I don't think I'd ever want to lose interpretability for that. But in this case, I think I feel comfortable for it being uninterpretable if it's clearly seems to be picking up some movement characteristics and features that clearly enhance the classification of performance.
Yes, thank you very much. I also struggle quite a lot with understanding this, but can you expand a little bit on the connection between the camera training data and the unsupervised stuff? Because why do you need the camera?
You don't, actually. Yeah, so,
you don't?
No, so camera data is not needed for this. So does... because, for example, if I look at the sleep measurements, there's no camera involved here at all, so it's actually then against polysonography, where I put lots of leads in a person's head. So the idea is that I got my humongous data set like the UK Biobank or the Hunt study or NHANES. I then can train my self-supervised learning method here, and all it's doing is just trying to identify what new features can I identify in, for example, a 10-second or a 30-second window of data. So it's trying to see, can I do better than a mean and a standard deviation or a Fourier transform feature? Then what I do is I use those features and essentially retrain them then for, in this case, a polysonography task, or maybe in another case it might be against a hip-worn signal, so it can be measured against any type of reference. The reason we used the camera data is just simply because it was sitting there, we knew it, we were familiar with it, and it makes one good exemplar task then for human activity recognition. But yeah, camera data is not needed for this.
One last question.
It took me about 3 years to get my head around this. It was my very brilliant DPhil student hang up here, who's very much the originator of this.
Thank you, Aidan. Very nice talk and great work you're doing, really moving the field forward a lot, I think. It was fascinating to see that you could use movement signature information from a human and apply it to an animal to improve classification of activity types. Could you go the other way around? Perhaps there are fundamentals of living beings. So if you have a really well characterized, you see where I'm going?
I think yes. Why not put it in millions of sheep or reindeer or something like that? And then can we learn then to help us do better human activity classification? Yes, you could absolutely do that. No one's done it. I'd love to see someone do it. So yes, and there'd be no compliance issues, etc. too. So yeah, I'd love to see someone do that. But in theory, yeah, it should help. Yeah, I think it could help. Yes, I don't know by how much, but that makes it a great research question, I think. Yeah.
Perfect. Thank you, Aidan. Thank you very much. Okay, so then we will have a break, but we will. No, that's cool. Okay, but we need to shorten the break because we are a bit before schedule. But 10:35, so between 15 and 20 minutes, because we maybe need to end this next session a bit before, because some people have some flights they need to reach. Okay, so please be back here at 10:35. riktig sted også, eller? Ja. Perfekt. Alltid greit å ha det sånn. Det er så mange steder nå hos dere. Okay, please take your seats. Okay, so it's my pleasure to invite the next speaker, Atle. He is a researcher at the Department of Public Health and Nursing at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. His work focuses on device-based measurement of physical activity, sleep, movement behaviors, and machine learning. He has played a central role in the hunt-4 study. So the floor is yours, yes. Atle.
Thank you. And I'm very happy to be here and talk to you. I'm quite relieved now that Aiden took more the difficult machine learning questions, because I'm far from a machine learning expert. But my role in this has been, of course, a huge team that is behind all this, the hunt for data. And my role in this, I've actually never worked on anything else than physical activity measurements. So my master thesis was the first validation of this activity, and I was responsible for the daily administration of the hunt-4 data collection, and also did my PhD on the data, and now also continuing to working on it and doing studies. And we actually have 38,000 people in our cohort. So first, I'll briefly describe the hunt dataset, if someone's not familiar, and talk a bit about the different machine learning models we have developed, and also some results from some of our studies, or other studies more. First, the hunt study, the helseundersøkelsen in what was Nord-Trøndelag, is a population-based study where all inhabitants in Nord-Trøndelag County is invited to participate. So everyone above the age of 12. In Hunt 1, started in the 80s, then it continues in the 90s, 2000s, and in Hunt 4, we had device-based measures of physical activity. And we had 54% of the adult population that participated. And actually, we had 76% of adolescents, those between 13 and 19, participated in Hunt 4. And also, there's been some additional studies, the Hunt COVID, which is more of a questionnaire-based and also a blood sample that was did in 2021 to 2023. And now we're planning the Hunt 5, which is scheduled to start in 2.5 years. We hope to recreate this device-based activity measurements. So our goal was to move away from the cut-based measures and classify the common daily activity types. And that being lying down, sitting, standing, walking, running, cycling, and also sleep. And this is the setup that we've used. One sensor attached directly on the thigh and one on the lower back that people asked to wear for 7 consecutive days. But this is how the raw acceleration signal looks like. So we had to transform this signal into some useful information. And we used a machine learning model to do this. And our approach was that we attached sensors on a validation sample, 20 people, sensors, and also a GoPro camera on the chest pointing down towards their legs. We were filming what they were doing. And we labeled what activities that were done. And this is based on a rigid definition of activities, where we actually had an iterator reliability of 0.96. After that, this is how the results of this. Here we have the labeled activities, and here we have the raw acceleration signal. So then, this is how the basis on most of our models looks like this. So then we tried to teach the model to see the same thing as what we have been labeled, as what we have labeled in the videos. This is our first validation study of these common daily activity types, the lying, sitting, standing, walking, and so on. Short about the procedure, we had a filtering, then we had to synchronize the two sensors, because we set the sensors to sample at 50 Hertz, but one might sample at 48 and one at 52, so then one of them runs from the other over time. Then they're not aligned, the signal. And we added an annotation, and we segmented the data. We used 1, 3, and 5 second windows, not 30. And then for each window, we created 138 different features. So for each 1, 3, and 5 second window, one activity was predicted. And we determined all the feature importance and used an extreme gradient boosting machine learning model. And use this leave one out cross-validation to measure their performance. That meaning if we have 20 people, then we train the model on 19 and test on the 20th and repeat that process. This is the result of the model. Here you can see we have an accuracy of about 95%. And we can see the 5-second model performs the best. And also, of course, the combined back and thigh model was the best. As simple a reason for like the only back model performs worse is that the alignment of the back sensor is identical when you sit and when you stand. So it's very difficult to distinguish between these two activities. And this is our confusion matrix. We have the labeled activities on the y-axis and the predicted on the x. And we can see there's around or above the 90s, except for standing and walking. That's because standing includes shuffling, like standing like this, like fidgeting with your feet as well. And it's important to remember that all activities you do during a day is forced into one of these buckets, no matter what you're doing. So I often get a question about strength training. If you're doing bench press, then we get lying down in this model. So that's the limitation. We wanted to expand on this to get, because we don't have any information about intensity, we want to get at least closer to that. We wanted to include walking speed. So we defined 3 different walking speeds: there's slow walking, moderate, and brisk walking. And these cutoffs are based on the compendium of physical activities and the corresponding MET values there. And this is the confusion matrix of the machine learning model that we used there. It was also an XGBoost model, if I remember correctly. And around 90% accuracy. And of course, we're learning more and more that we should include sleep in our studies. So we also wanted to distinguish between sleep and wake. So here we had 18 sleep patients that were in from the hospital that had insomnia and so on, and also 30 healthy adults. And then we attached accelerometers and had this polysomnography in this hat that measures brain activity that we used as the gold standard. This model had excellent sensitivity, about 95%, but the specificity was worse, were moderate. Because when you're lying completely still and being awake, it's very difficult for the model to say that if you're asleep or if you're awake. But we also included skin temperature, because the accelerometer actually has temperature monitor inside. And also we added midterm sleep, just setting a point in the middle of the night. Then the model actually increased quite a lot, the specificity. And we also have some additional models, a no-wear time model based on temperature and acceleration. That when no-wear time is predicted for 1 hour, one consecutive hour, then we stop predicting activities. We also have collected some data on super slow walking and walking uphill and downhill. This has not been implemented in our model in Hunt. And the same for these two, there are separate models for elderly and children. And also, as Aidan briefly mentioned, actually mentioned this paper, we also have used the self-supervised pre-training, or Alexei and Kirstenbach, if you know where we extracted 100,000 hours from the Hunt dataset into different 5-minute windows. And then we were masking the activity or the signal based on like spectrograms. It's like a visual representation of the signal. And you ask the model to try to recreate or unmask the signal. And then actually the F1, when we then applied the machine learning model we created previously, then the F1 score increased by 10%, actually. So let's move over to the activity measurements in Hunt. We have valid data of 32,500 people with at least 24 hours of measurements with both sensors. Missing data on 5,500 people, and we actually lost 3,000 of 5,600 sensors. In absolute terms, that's a lot, but in relative terms, it's like 3–4%. And some of the reasons for this is here. The envelopes broke, and people lost them, and also people threw them in the trash, because when they removed them early, when they were itching and so on. So that was quite of a headache during the data collection. And also that's the reason why we didn't get more people to actually we didn't have enough sensors to have a large enough turnover. As was mentioned yesterday about the ungKan, I also want to present some few facts for you. We have 4.2 million hours of recordings. And 70,000 AX3 that were downloaded and set up and so on had around 350 to 700 sensors each day that were downloaded, initialized, cleaned, taped, and so on. And we also have working forms, 17,000 working forms, because people were reporting when they're starting and ending at work. So we have some opportunities there as well. And we actually have a mean wear time of 5.6 days. And for most people, the maximum is 6 days, since we cut out the first few hours where they start the recording and when they remove the sensors. And here are a few pictures. This is my fingers. My fingerprint on the phone didn't work for 18 months when I did the data collection after cleaning all the sensors. And here you can see a large scale that optimizing the process of with the sensors. And also we made this taping bench to cut up tape with a homemade style. So here's an overview of the dataset in age groups and men and women. We see in all age groups that there are more women than men. And actually, we have 7 participants above 100 years and 138 above the age of between 90 and 99. So it has to be one of the biggest cohorts in this such an old age group. And I'm going to share some results from some of our papers based on this data. In this study, we looked at the contribution of key everyday activities to moderate to vigorous physical activity and also total physical activity, and also if the composition differed between seasons and between age groups. And here we had a population, total 32,500 people, ranging from 12 to 103 years. And here is our some results. Here we have the different age groups and the different seasons. And we can see that seasonal variation in MVPA decreased with age. And we can also see that, moderate and brisk walking were the main contributors to MVPA for all age groups. The most pronounced in the adolescents. And also here you can see the composition changes with age. A higher amount of moderate and brisk walking the older people get. But the interesting point here is that up to the age of 75, 96% of people had at least 10 minutes of MVPA a week, in addition to a slow walking. So then we might suggest that increasing your walking speed might be a viable option to increase your MVPA. And we also looked at the meeting WHO recommendations. Here's an example from the adolescents where it was most pronounced. So overall, 31.5% of adolescents met the minimum recommendations. But during winter, it was only 19.6%, and summer, 53%. So taking season into account when we're looking at this, if they fulfill the recommendations, I think that's very important, at least in a country like Norway. In this study, we compared self-reported and device-measured sitting time. And the question was approximately how many hours do you spend sitting on a normal weekday, include both work and leisure time? And that was a very hard question for people to answer. There we had a population of 24,000 people with almost 4 weekdays, the mean wear time. Well, 4 weekdays was the maximum for most people, or weekdays. Here's a Bland-Altman plot, where at the x-axis we have the device-measured sitting time, which we used as the gold standard. And on the y-axis, we have self-reported minus device-measured sitting time. So if everyone was reporting to sit the same amount as they were measured with the devices, then all the dots would fall on this red dotted line. But as we can see, that is not the case. So mean sitting time, self-report, 6.8 hours a day, and devices, 8.6. So at average, people underestimated the sitting time by almost 2 hours. And the correlation was 0.1. Not too far from the sleep that you presented, Aiden. And also, not presenting that now, but then we also had some differential misclassification between different groups. So those who were younger were much better to report their sitting time than the older. And similarly, with education, those with a university degree were better than those with a lower education. And same with what the physical work demands you had. Those who had very sedentary jobs, they were pinpoint accurate at average in reporting their sitting time, but the more active work they had, people tended to underestimate more and more. And then I think we have a question. So, could people have been more active during the first day wearing the accelerometers? Excellent question. Good thinking. This is the unpublished data. So I just had to look into when we just plot the data, it looks like there is a clear tendency that there is walking time per day, total walking time per day, that there is some, that people are walking more the first day with measurements and less. But when we take into account which day they had their first day with accelerometers, we actually see that it's mostly an effect of weekends. There's some small differences between weekdays, but I would argue it's not a clinically or a significant one. Then we all looked at association with sport and exercise during adolescence, and body composition and also activity during adulthood. So people were asked how many hours and days do you spend in sport and exercise each week. Here we use the young Hunt 1 and young Hunt 3 as baseline with follow-up in Hunt 4. And the results were that we saw a positive association between sport and exercise during adolescence and MVPA during adulthood. You see there's quite a dose response here, a clear trend. So the same with body fat, a positive association between sport and exercise participation in adolescence and body composition. And we also looked if this is dependent of MVPA, and we found out to some extent it is. And we have looked at the volume and intensity of walking and the risk of chronic low back pain. Here we have the Hunt 4 as our baseline data with follow-up in Hunt COVID around 4 years later, where we answered a questionnaire about their low back pain. And that study is based on 11,000 participants. There we could see that volume was most important there was a lower risk of chronic low back pain than the volume were more important than the intensity or the speed of your walking. So walk more, don't walk faster. That's that's one of the takeaway message from this. And also we've done some intergenerational and genetic studies where we examine the association of physical activity in parents and in their adult offspring, exploring both their genetic liability to physical activity and how this influences the association. So here we actually had 24,000 complete trios of families and their parents and their offsprings. So here we can see in both girls and boys that if the mother was physically active and the father, we can see that then the offspring was more physically active. And same if we created this polygenic risk score, if people were liable to be physically active, then we also could see some effect of this. But we didn't find any evidence of an effect modification between these factors. But from this, we could say that a family-based approach to promote physical activity may be effective from a public health perspective. At last, I just want to mention Socrates, that true knowledge is knowing that you know nothing. And I think we have so much data now, and we know so much about what we should do. And I'm not saying that we should stop doing these short surveillance studies. They're super important. But as you are doing in the ORCPA, I think we should maybe move our focus a bit towards more the intervention studies. Because we know that some activity is better than none, more activity better than less, and a bit higher intensity, at least once in a while, is better than a bit lower intensity. But I think the knowledge gap, as I see it at least, is that we are not able to get people to be physically active. There's always those who are least active that we're not able to reach. And that's, I guess, we're back to the Jeffrey Rose approach. Again, the population versus the high-risk approach. Thank you.
Thank you, Atle. Very nice presentation and a huge effort you're doing in the Hunt study. Impressive work. So we have time for a couple of questions before the next sessions. Any questions?
Thank you for a great presentation. I think you have quite good participation rate in your adolescents. I was just curious how you reached them and how you managed to get them to wear these
The
slumbers.
adolescents?
Yeah.
We had teams that went around to every school, both ungdomsskole and videregående. When they actually, it was a huge work before. It was out on each school and talking about the principles and so on. So all schools were on board, and they set off complete days where pupils were, or students were encouraged to participate. So everything was in place, and they traveled around at every school in Nord-Trøndelag.
Thank you for the very nice presentation. Great work. Really, really great. So we've seen two different ways of getting to the classified physical activity behaviors. There's the Capture 24 approach, and then you did a lab-based approach, right?
Yeah, for the training data?
For the training data, yeah. Can you reflect on the differences between those approaches and how it may impact classification in real life?
Yeah, of course it was. Well, it was like we call it semi-free living, but we only had people were wearing the GoPro cameras for 1.5 hours, and they got a list of activities that they had to do within 1.5 hours. But of course, there's some constraints that we're not able to capture all the variation in activities that people are doing. And that I think that is reflected in the pre-training data, because there we actually are able to capture more of the variations in the signal that we're not able to capture when we only have the semi-free living of 1.5 hours on 20 participants.
Could be nice to cross-test.
Yeah. But we actually, we had the annotation. It was actually, we annotated activity for each 400th of a second. We had an annotation. So it's quite time-consuming just to annotate and get it precise.
On the children model, we have 3 different protocols for validation. We had the standardized in like Gimsal. And then we had more like the semi-protocols where they were asked to do sitting in different ways and more free. And then we had free play. And the accuracy went down with the degree of freedom that the children got. So
yeah, but there's a lot of more variation in how kids play.
Yeah, it's really hard in children, and that you don't see the same variations in adults. But the degree of freedom was messing up the validation study.
Okay, one last question.
Yes, thank you. I was just wondering how much the angle of the monitors influences the models, both types of models. Because I guess, for example, we use hip placement, where I suppose it would be vertical, although we were sitting or standing and running, while hip and wrist could detect differently. Does it use the angle from the activity, or is it more based on the actual vector magnitudes?
Yeah, we had the angle as well, because all the features are based on like the time and frequency domain. But we see there's difficult when people are sitting like bananas, like then there's what is lying, what is sitting. Then we have this, I don't know exactly where the where the cutoff is, but there's somewhere there when it's like I used to sit in my office.
I have a question as well. This is a bit specific, but I was wondering if you see a steeper decline in walking and cycling once adolescents turn 16, when they get access to mopeds, and when they turn 18, I was wondering the same as well, because then their peers or themselves get access to a car.
We see a difference. We see a decline when between ungdomsskole and videregående. We see that there are less activity, less MVPA, less walking, cycling, and running when adolescents get 16, 17, 18. We actually see that effect. But 18, I don't know. I haven't seen 18 versus 16, 17.
Thank you very much, Atle. And then we move over to the last part of this session, which is a plenary discussion. So I think I just invite Joanna, Aiden, and Ulf to the stage, and looking forward to this.
Okay, as you can see from the title, from self-report to raw data metrics, key takeaways from the WHO meetings on global population measurements. As I think both Joanna and others alluded to yesterday, WHO are aiming to implement device measures in their surveillance systems. And there has been a couple of meetings. Joanna showed the reports yesterday on how to do that, on a global scale. So this plenary discussion, we're going to start with a brief introduction from Joanna and an introduction from Aiden, and then we will open up the floors for comments and a discussion. And we really hope that all of you engage in the discussion, because that's the aim of this. And if there are no discussion, there is the end of the session, basically. So try to think about how would you, if you were WHO, how would you implement device-based measures? And obviously, we open up for any kinds of questions, both about the presentations Joanna and Aiden are giving, and also any general questions on the topics of measuring physical activity and how we should take it forward, whether we should continue, and what are the advantages of using machine learning and etc. when we are processing the data. So, Joanna, please.
Thank you. And thank you to all the presenters this morning, because it's been a lovely journey through sort of device-based measures. And as WHO, this is not our area of expertise. We are here to try and support all countries to improve their surveillance methods, but we rely on the expertise of people like yourself to help us with that. And I'll go back to those of you who might have seen my slides yesterday. These are some of our core functions that we do as WHO. And I think what we bring particularly to this agenda is a neutrality. We are device agnostic, algorithm agnostic. We're here to try and help all countries to develop the best ways of measuring physical activity that we can. And I want you to keep 3 countries in mind as we talk. This has got to be appropriate for Botswana, Bolivia, and Bulgaria. So really varied countries with different sorts of needs, but that's what we as WHO need to address, the needs of all those different countries. And this is about measuring at scale. So it's not so much, we're not so worried about the individual and whether I got 10,000 steps or 999, because it's much more about the whole population and how we measure that as a whole. And we do that in the same way as many of the studies that were presented today, by selecting that random representative sample. But we need to do that in a way that we can then afterwards compare those estimates that we get from these very varied countries. And to date, we've been producing global comparable estimates based entirely on self-reported measures. So predominantly using GPAC, often through a surveillance method that WHO supports called a stepwise, but also looking at some of the IPAC data. So that's how we, to date, particularly for adults. And for children, we do something similar, relying heavily on the Global Student Health Survey and the health behaviors of school children, because those are 2 survey instruments that we can compare. They're very similar in the way they ask their questions. This was my summary slide of the recommendations, because the recommendations that WHO make in terms of physical activity for different age groups are what we measure against, whether people are achieving those recommendations or not. And it's a bit of a mixed picture. So we're not doing too badly at the moment, asking people about whether they achieve 150 minutes. You know, they're asked to recall what they've done in the last week and add those minutes up. But we're not actually effectively measuring how much sedentary time people have. And I think we've seen really good data that people are not very good at estimating how much time they've been sitting. We're not measuring some of those important bits, particularly for the least active, of how you might be doing some, but maybe you're not reaching that 150. We're completely not reporting anything on that at all. And I think the new data we have show that that's a really important population group that we need to focus on more. We're not doing anything about the muscle strengthening. Certainly at the global scale, we're not reporting anything on muscle strengthening. We know that that's a really important type of physical activity. And for older adults, the multi-component activities, which are really crucial to maintaining balance and function. So that's the picture we have at the moment. That's the instrument we're using at the moment. Everybody says it's too long, it's too many questions, they're too repetitive, can't remember. They're hard questions to answer. And using those questions, that's the information we're getting, that nearly a third of people, certainly of adults, are not active enough. They're not meeting that 150 minutes of MBPA per week. So can we do better? We think we can, and we're hoping we can, and we're hoping that wearables, devices, are going to help us to really move this area forward, because it does look like people are overestimating how much physical activity they're doing. So as WHO, our role, we see, to develop global guidance on the use of a wearable device to measure physical activity and hopefully sedentary behavior as part of a national health survey. To do that, it needs to be device agnostic. We're not going to recommend one device over another, but we need to set some minimum standards for that. And it's a long road. We're in it for the long haul because we see that there is a lot of work to be done in order to develop these standards, the protocols that go with them, because it's not just developing the machine, but it's also the algorithm that helps to analyze that data. And then it's the standard operating procedures, because you've seen issues that you already have had in Norway, for example, with your devices falling out of envelopes. Imagine doing that in Bolivia or Botswana, where the postal system is really unreliable. So you might need to drive out there, but that drive out there to that village could be 4 or 5 hours along a dirt road. So are you going to go back and collect everything again in 7 days' time? So we need to work through the whole system in order to provide countries with the full protocol that they would need to apply. And to get there, we're taking a stepwise approach. So we've held 4 meetings to date, bringing together experts to scope this work, both for adults and adolescents, to look at some of those wearable technologies and what we might need to do in order to move forward from just a research agenda to a population-based surveillance agenda, and then look at how we might insert these wearable devices into national systems. So the last meeting we had in the Netherlands brought together a number of different countries to share their experiences, to share the experiences of devices dropping out of envelopes or issues with losing things because people might put them in the bin. And that is all leading to what WHO call target product profiles. Target product profiles are usually developed for things like vaccines or laboratory methods. This is the first time we're doing one for a wearable device that will be deployed in surveillance. And so we're charting a new path. We're hoping it's going to be straight and simple. We accept that it might have little wiggles, and it may be a little bit roundabout. But that's essentially where we're aiming towards. And those target product profiles have a particular methodology to develop. We love to have processes at WHO, just to make life simple. We need to have groups who contribute to that, so it's a process that gets inputs from many, many different people. There will be a consultation, a public consultation on that before it's published, and it has various different steps to get to that end point. And luckily, we have people who are in this room who are contributing to those steps, which allows me to pass over to Aidan as one of those.
I've still not figured out how to get this. There you go. Oh, thank you, Tom Dangle. And I guess as Juana said, then there are many challenges of making this work in a Bolivia or a Botswana. So there certainly is a huge amount of logistical issues around that. And as Juan has also said, those meetings have focused on the characteristics of a device that would seem acceptable. So that'd be things like we really believe it should collect raw data. Additionally, then I guess how raw is raw. So there's discussions of should it be at least 30 hertz sample rate, or a 40 hertz sample rate, or a 50 hertz sample rate. I think we've settled on about 30 off the top of my head, and then even some of the discussions are what should be the range of sensitivity in the sensor. Then is it the plus or minus how many G, how many bit resolution, etc. So there's been some fun discussions around that. But essentially, as you could imagine, it being a Gini active or an actigraph or an exivity type device would meet those characteristics. And the other thing that Juana said is, I guess, what might be some of the priority measurements that would be a focus to begin with? So again, if I'm the Minister of Public Health in Botswana, I think I want to incorporate the wearables into my surveillance program. Why do I want to do that? What am I trying to measure? So in the meetings thus far, I think it's been very much coalescing around time spent in MVPA, because that's in the guidelines, time spent in sedentary behavior, because that's mentioned in the WHO guidelines, and the final one then being step count, because it's highly likely, we would imagine, to be in the next set of guidelines. So the focus has been very much in the meetings around those, the measurements of those three traits, MVPA time, sedentary time, and step count. And now the next question we had, I'm not sure how many health ministers will have this question, but we want to be ahead of the game a little bit, or be forewarned in this. So will the Minister of Botswana then come back to us and say, well, how much can I trust the measurement of MVPA from the device? I've gone off, I've done my background reading on this, and I can see there's 5 or 6 different algorithms to measure MVPA. Which one should I use, and which one then should the WHO guidance recommend that the minister in Botswana uses? And I think we're a little bit unsure of that at the minute, so we're just trying to think of the best way to work through that. And ideally, it would be some independent evaluation of the methods in a variety of different data sets to then see which one performs best, and to be the recommended MVPA algorithm, or the recommended sedentary detection algorithm, or the recommended sedentary behavior identification algorithm. So it would be probably something along the lines of, this was just one of the meetings, an example that I'd showed then of step count measurement. It was, this was the Oxford step count method, so I'm obviously showing a biased example here, but at least it was validations or independent validations taken place by others who are not the Oxford teams. We believe it's very important that the algorithm developer is not involved in the assessment of this. This is one then that Sarah Keedle's team had done in direct observation then of a camera looking at how many steps a person is doing versus the step count assessment then from the wrist device. So what we really want our studies like us, we'd much prefer if the N was much larger, first of all. These are quite small N's against direct observation. But we've got to start somewhere, and we've got ideas I'll show in the next couple of slides on how to vastly increase the N in these independent validation studies. Oh, I didn't paste in the right image here, but there's a paper from Chuck Matthews I wanted to show, so I was putting this together then last slide. But the measurement of sedentary behavior seems pretty good from the wrist, but what we're a little bit vexed about is, sorry, I'm on the wrong slides, is back to this example I showed earlier this morning of the MVPA assessment. Certainly the machine learning methods, the performance is a bit worrying across populations. And the cut points is possibly the best way to go on that, but we don't actually have much validation data outside the high-income Western world for the cut point assessment methods against a direct reference standard, or at least not that we're aware of. So hence we had thought, should we bring together a group of people to try and do some form of assessment of all the methods out there, then to try and help guide and provide input and feedback to the WHO team. So essentially then the focus is around, as I said, steps, sedentary time, moderate vigorous time. As I said, there are many, many algorithms to measure these behaviors, and what we really need is a head-to-head comparison of the potential algorithms on the same data sets. And we believe that nobody has done this before, and we need some leadership around this. So there's a current working group. It's not an exclusive members-only club. We're very open to including other people. The only barrier to entry is that we want people who will be hands-on involved. So if they bring data or willing to do hands-on comparison, so we want it to be unfortunately a real working group and not a steering committee. So we got some of the names that many I think you'll be familiar with then, and it's got obviously Fiona from the WHO side closely involved in this. And the current thoughts are, well, what's the definition of MVPA? It will be, so this is the definition we have for MVPA at present. Similarly for sedentary time, I think these would be fairly non-controversial definitions of those. And then step count is always the thing of, does a shuffle count as a step? We've thus far gone with a definition of the act of lifting a foot and placing it in a new location as the central tenet of a step identification. So this is the current working definitions that the group has. And at present, we've identified, again, this is thinking of the very educated minister of Botswana then, who's saying, well, I've seen 6 step count algorithms or 8 MVPA or 6 sedentary time algorithms. Which ones do I pick? So we're currently in the process of trying to see which data sets can be used to give a fair assessment of those methods and algorithms against each other. And I think that was my last slide. These were the candidate methods that have been identified thus far. So the group is actively working on ways to independently assess these. So, for example, I should not be involved in probably any of these because I see there's like, for example, some Oxford methods for step count, some Oxford methods for sedentary time, and for the MVPA, and similarly. So I should not be involved in these validations because we want it to be an independent assessment there too, which we believe is very important. How did any methods get here? Essentially, our rationale was, it's got to be openly available so that somebody else can use it, and B, there's got to be some evidence that somebody else has used a method that you've created. So we want to see that another group not related to the team that made the method has used that method, so it kind of indicates, because otherwise we could have hundreds of methods to try and compare against, and we're currently trying to select the different data sets around that. But the key thing we have in mind for this is essentially that we don't want perfection to stop progress in this. So we'll never get a perfect measurement of MVPA from a wrist, or we'll never get a perfect measurement of sedentary time from the wrist, or we'll never get a perfect measurement of step count from the wrist. But wow, it's going to be so much better than a questionnaire-based assessment. And the opportunities for harmonizability are so much greater than, so we're not looking at differences of interpretation by different languages, cultural contexts, etc. So we're really keen to support the WHO to really integrate these devices in particularly the STEPS program in a variety of countries around the world. So that's where our thoughts are up to at the minute. I think there's been a huge amount of progress over the last 15 months in this space. And I'd like to say a huge thank you to Juana and Fiona at the WHO for their enthusiasm, because I think you've actually really reinvigorated the field to try and, rather than say my method's better and your method's, trying to think collectively then, have we got a way of assessing which method is best, so then we can incorporate it into these large international surveillance systems. So with that, I'll hand over to Ulf. Thank you.
Please take his seat on the stage. So you can sit or stand, whatever you like. You can even move around. I suppose, having the opportunity to ask a first question, why do all this huge amount of work when we know that there are millions of people around the globe using commercial wearables? Why not try to use the data from commercial wearables? Do you want to take on that challenge? And yeah, you can. Yeah.
Well, I think I take it back to the Botswana and the Bolivian farmer. I don't think either of them have got an Apple Watch. So you would be looking at a really select population. It might be appropriate in Europe, but when I think of the rest of the world, that there's not that coverage of commercial wearables. And in terms of using commercial wearables that we would then give to a surveillance system, I think that's got two issues. One is cost, because the likelihood of them coming back, even if they were put in the envelope or somebody went to fetch them, you know, they're more likely to disappear. And secondly, they give feedback. So I think that's the other issue that we've looked at, that if somebody's suddenly given something that's telling them how many steps they're doing, whether that's going to radically change what they would do normally, as opposed to getting their feedback later.
We'll give this one to Ulf. And then just to piggyback on top of that, just add one other additional thing then is, so I guess maybe, how do I compare the different devices? So maybe in China it might be more maybe Huawei or devices, whereas maybe in the US might be more Apple Watches, and it might be another type of device, and then it might be Apple Watch version 5 in one country is more popular. So we feel then the harmonizability is more challenging, and also then we had felt very strongly in the meetings thus far that having access to the raw data would be really quite transformative, A, for harmonizability, but then B, for future-proofing these exercises as well.
I mean, during these meetings we've had, you have come up with some common standards. I mean, least denominator. Could you just, because I don't think everybody is aware of those common standards for the equipment going to be used. Can you just summarize it slightly?
I'll I'll try. So my memory might not be the best on this, since it was the meeting was in Montreal in June. So it was in the report that Juana has helpfully shared. Essentially, it came down to it could be a Gini active, it could be an activity, it could be an actigraph. So we wanted to keep it quite open, because I think there are some really nice validation studies showing that if you have all the devices worn on your arm, that essentially you get the same output from those. So essentially it was a device that can give you raw data of the type that we would use in our day-to-day research. Probably the biggest or most contentious one is the location of the device, which we usually always have. Should it be thigh? Should it be wrist? Should it be hip? The recommendation thus far is wrist. Why wrist? It's felt it's probably the easiest one to administer. Again, if we're thinking about Bolivia or Botswana, if I've got a thigh device, obviously I've got to have additional cost and patches to give to people for the adhesive devices. The hip, I think we know there certainly are issues in certain contexts then around the compliance of the data from the hip. So it felt the wrist is probably not the perfect, but a pragmatic location from that. But as well, I'd like to emphasize that we very much recognize that, for example, Norway here has got incredibly valuable trends data from the hip, similarly with Canada. So I don't think there would ever be a forcing of countries to change what they've done, but it's perhaps thinking of new countries, particularly in LMIC settings, of what might be the lowest barrier of entry to them.
Yeah.
Anything you want to add, John?
I mean, I think we're also some of the way to defining some of the criteria. So what the machine itself would contain, but really looking to find whether it's possible to reduce the price of those, because the Minister of Health in Botswana is going to want to know, are they going to buy 1,000 of these in order to send them out into their system? Is WHO going to have a bank of these that we ship around the world? I don't know if anybody's tried shipping any of these things, but batteries are really difficult to ship these days. Battery life is really important. It's got to be dust-proof. It's got to be really robust. It's got to be easy. And I think that comes to the point of why we're looking at wrist rather than any other application, just for some of the experience that some countries have had with trying to use wearables, particularly in adolescence, where there was huge concern about what this thing did. What was it really measuring? We're often quite careful with using the word surveillance as well, because that has other connotations for some people, and that's a great concern.
And shipping monitors around the world is quite complicated due to customs and stuff. We are currently trying to lend some monitors to Brazil, and it's just a nightmare, yeah. So I think we have at least a question from Professor Hansen.
Maybe you alluded to it in your last comment, but and this is maybe a naive question, but has the WHO considered just producing its own monitor? I mean, accelerometers are fairly cheap and fairly simple, and just to avoid the whole brand of monitor thing, and then you could have a bank and you could provide them.
Yeah, so producing things like monitors isn't really our job, in the same way that we don't produce blood pressure machines. We set the standards for them. We set the standards for what they must do, the minimum standards and the optimal standards. So the minimum standard one is going to be applicable for everywhere. But if a country wants to use an optimal one, if they can get the raw data off an Apple Watch, you could use that. So it's setting those standards so that they're applicable and comparable across the world. We may end up buying some and lending them to some countries. So we provide support to countries through our office and through the country offices to run some of these surveys. And we have done a small pilot of this. We did actually take some accelerometers out to Malawi. It was complicated. It wasn't simple.
Yeah, my question is related. Have you considered kind of issuing a competition for somebody to who can produce an accelerometer for us that only costs 20 euros? Is that an idea you have considered?
That would be a great idea, and where without necessarily issuing a competition and therefore being associated with saying that this one that somebody produced, that you produced, is the one that we recommend, that by doing the target product profile, we're hoping to drive industry to meet those standards and produce them at the cost without necessarily branding or being seen to support one device over another.
Because, I mean, losing 3,000 activities, that's not...
That's expensive.
That's very expensive.
No, we would love it to be $10. We'll put up with about 50 max, but 10 would be ideal. I think Fiona always says 5, but I'm a bit more...
Yes, Johan. Good, I can get some exercise here.
Yes, thank you. I was just wondering, because you mentioned it a bit, do you think established companies such as Garmin and Apple would have a role in the monitoring in the future? It's obviously already established wearables for risks and algorithms.
Well, I think it comes back to the raw data issue and getting the raw data off them.
But I think you made a good point that there certainly is more a movement, I think, in the commercial companies now to trying to provide some open or access to the raw data sensors. So you'd mentioned about the example of the Apple Watch, you have their SensorWare API. So I think we want to leave it so it would be open for innovation from industry then, so the consumer companies could contribute. Although again, I think we'd still like the kind of the deliberate sampling in populations rather than just, for example, relying on whoever happens to have a Fitbit or an Apple Watch within a population.
So you showed, Aidan, that the performance of the model in predicting MVPA in China was poor. What does that mean? Is it predicting too much? Is it predicting too little? Can we understand what is the problem? Because my take on MVPA is that we should be sort of pragmatic. We haven't solved MVPA for actigraph, and we've had 30 years of doing that. So in my perspective, we just need to set a level, and then, okay, if we know that people are above this level, we know something about intensity.
Great questions. We've actually not done a proper Bland-Altman plot of that, so it's kind of a little bit hacked together as part of a supplement section within a paper in the China Kadoorie Biobank. So we really ought to look at it more properly. The reason I'm holding off is I'd like better quality validation data sets that we now are collecting, because that particular Chinese data set, there's some methodological issues of it that I don't fully feel comfortable with. So it's currently an active work to look at that in more detail. But I completely agree with your sentiment, Jakob, then that we should not be seeking perfection either. It's just, I think, quantifying our uncertainty around that, because my a priori belief is that the measurement from it is still going to be, I think, a lot more probably trustworthy than from the GPAC questionnaire, and I think a big step forward for that. And I do feel very confident that the assessment of sedentary and of step count is, I think, really trustworthy and across populations, because there's a number of papers coming out now comparing, for example, wrist to thigh for sedentary, and there's, I think, very high concordance between both. And then similarly of the step count validations we've seen, they've been very strong. So it's a very long way of saying I agree with you. We shouldn't let perfect be the enemy of good enough.
So, if I understand it correctly, the major limitation today is that you don't really have, in the WAVES consortium, you really need more ground truth data, whether it's direct observation or videos or whatever it is, to be able to annotate the data and train the models, etc., etc., etc. And how do you, or we, really achieve that to get more annotated data?
It two ways, I think. So one is, I think there actually is a number of good enough data sets already available. It's just maybe that the authors, data custodians of those have not maybe worked together as well as, or there hasn't been the incentive to work together, which I now do believe does exist. And we had two levels of validation in mind. So the first is the kind of the perfect utopian scenario then of the kind of direct observation type work that, for example, Sarah Keedle would do. We've identified about 5-6 different such validation data sets. And then we've got what we call pragmatic field-based reference measurements. So thinking of sedentary behaviour, we think a thigh accelerometer would be a perfectly good enough standard to compare against. For step count, we think probably an ankle accelerometer would be a perfectly good enough reference standard to compare against, because then you can have samples of hundreds of individuals. So there are already data sets that we know exist in Canada and the UK, Spain, that actually have wrist thigh accelerometer data in thousands of individuals. So it's trying to reach out to the custodians of those ones to work together as part of the team on this, and everyone's been very positive so far. So I feel quite hopeful around that maybe the end of this year we'll have, at least within ourselves, some knowledge of the performance characteristics of these.
But I suppose as you alluded to, using heart rate for moderate intensity,
yes,
moderate and vigorous intensity, might be a bit tricky, because we currently are defining moderate and vigorous intensity in absolute levels, and heart rate is really a relative response to your fitness level in the individual. So you need to get around that in some way or another, right?
Yeah. I'd love to pick your brain on that, Ulf.
I know we are in pressure, or Joanna is in pressure of time. So if you want to leave, because there is a train leaving or a tube leaving in 8 minutes, I know. So and you need to catch your flight. So please feel free to leave. Aidan, we're going to keep you for a while more if we have any other questions, or if there are any other questions. But just feel free to leave.
I will, so that I only have to jog lightly to the metro. But just to say thank you. You know, this has been a really great meeting, and I've really enjoyed hearing about the work that you're all doing and having this opportunity to exchange a little bit on what WHO is doing. And I think we really see our role now as providing that platform for this global group to get together and share data, because that's what we can bring to the table. The fact that you're all contributing to something global, it's neutral, everybody puts aside their egos, and we all share the data. And I think we're all very excited about how this is progressing, and just look forward to continuing the work. Anyway, thank you all very much. I'm really sorry to dash off, but if I miss my flight, I'm in trouble with my family.
So I will just continue with what Joanna ended up with. The WAVES Consortium, Aidan opened up for taking part in that. I think it would be a great opportunity if anybody is interested in doing accelerometer work and contribute to the work of developing these algorithms, if we have data or if we collect new data. I suppose you already mentioned that sedentary is sorted, steps are sorted, MVP might be the issue.
Yes.
So we may want to think about how to have a perfect ground truth during free living for moderate and vigorous intensity activity, and then combined with wrist accelerometry, because that's where we're going forward. So any comments or questions about that, Bjørge?
How should we address the strength component of the guidelines when we do surveillance?
I think there's been a very clear decision that we don't feel we can do that with devices. So I think we're kind of we collectively as a community are sort of holding our hand up saying devices are not going to help, or at least to our current knowledge, are not going to help with that. So we're acknowledging our limitation on that. We're not covering that.
Shouldn't switch it off. Just a commentary. We are involved in, you probably know, this Interlife project. And there is actually a group now trying to work on, but that's on commercial wearables, but trying to work out whether commercial wearables actually can pick up strength training. I'm not entirely sure how they're going to do it, but that's one of the aims at least. So that's going to be interesting to follow. But it's only from different types of commercial wearables, but if it's possible from a commercial wearable, I mean, it's translated into a research wearable as well. So do we have any other comments or questions? Yes, Yuji.
Yes, thank you again. I was just wondering how the self-supervised models perform in detecting the age of the participants. Because I guess MVPA should be considered, for example, if we use thresholds, it should be considered based on probably their age, but also, I guess, in a way, relative to how much it fluctuates within participants in a way.
Good question. So certainly for even a simple signal like vector magnitude, it's got a very strong cross-sectional association by older people are obviously clearly much less active than younger people. Others have tried to essentially run machine learning methods to see, can I classify age from the accelerometer signal alone? There certainly does appear to be quite a bit of signal related to that and some promising results. So I always get in my head, it's not just easier to ask someone their age than to go through all this work then from a complex signal to recapitulate that. Obviously on the aging field there's a lot of interest in your heart age, your brain age, your liver age, and then your movement age. So that's the current trend in the field. So yes, a little bit of aging-related component to it. How that fits into the MVPA assessment, I genuinely don't know. So I think, again, within the WAVES group, I think we would desperately love, I think, to have more of a steer on what would be a good, pragmatic, reference-based or field-based reference measurement of the MVPA assessment, and then what might be sensible methods and algorithms then to assess against that, ideally at least in 2, 3, 4 different populations.
So circadian rhythms, going back to self-supervised data. I've heard of a group trying to develop a sleep algorithm in children, and it ended up being that children could only be classified as waking up within a specific time interval of the day. So it just wasn't possible from that model to wake up any other part of the day. And obviously that's nonsense in real life. It's rare, but it's nonsense. So could we have similar issues for specific intensities or movement behaviors, cycling at night? Could that be impossible? I'm just thinking, how do you see that? Because when we don't understand what's happening, we can have these.
Cycling at night, going home from the
That is quite frequent in Örebro, perhaps.
Maybe in the north of Norway then too, in the middle of summer. But the good question. So I guess it comes back to how you described yourself in the break then. You said, I'm a humble, descriptive epidemiologist, and obviously you're much, much more than that. So I think it is with a lot of these methods, certainly before we apply them for epidemiological analysis in the UK Biobank, we do some essentially face validity checks to try and, we don't look at each and every one of the traces for the 90 or 100,000 participants, but we do look at least at a population level. Are there maybe some expected variations by background demographics, so maybe by people who are shift workers, or one of my favorites is that when we looked at a method to identify bicycling, then are we at least picking up more bicycling behaviours in the people who self-report that they commute to work by biking. So I think it comes back to just being a good epidemiologist and the use of those models to check that they perform in a way that you expect before you then run off and do an association analysis. Then perhaps what you're perhaps getting at, and my brain slowly catching up with yours then, is as part of the WAVES group then, should we have some assessments of that? So maybe method X might look like it performs very well against a reference, but then if you maybe deploy it in the NHANES data set, it's got some quite peculiar characteristics and in terms of bicycling in the middle of the night or something like that that we might not have expected. It's just by the overall average it got lucky, but it doesn't quite make sense. And if you look at it in more detail, we haven't quite planned that yet. I think it was more so a traditional validation approach we thought of comparison against a reference measurement with a kappa score or sensitivity, specificity for each individual class was more where our thoughts were at the minute, and again, trying not to let perfect be the enemy of good enough for the minute, but we should certainly look to improve and make things better. But I'm quite keen we get something out soon before the WHO lose interest.
Thank you, Aidan. We talked yesterday about a project we're doing now, simultaneously collecting on wrist and hip. And we've seen from some studies that it seems that hip-worn MVPA is more strongly associated with health outcomes than wrist-worn MVPA. And I guess hip-worn is by no means a ground truth, but from a pragmatic point of view, could we use this data, use the hip-worn data to train the wrist data to better detect MVPA?
Good question, and it comes back to my suspicion as well of it doesn't quite feel like a reference measurement. So then what we thought of as kind of two levels of reference measurement, one being a primary source of reference, so direct observation, I think of as almost as near a gold standard as one would get. And then the thought was to have a second kind of more pragmatic field-based reference then that has performed well against the primary reference measurement in kind of small samples, because generally the primary reference is kind of video observation that's hard to scale up to larger sample sizes. But if, let's say, for example, sedentary behavior, then a thigh-worn device has performed very well against video direct observation in the smaller samples that you get in those type of studies, then we feel comfortable saying that the thigh-based or accelerometer is a good field or pragmatic field-based reference standard. To my knowledge, then, I guess I think maybe the hip accelerometer doesn't quite meet that threshold of being close enough to perfect that we feel happy to use it as a reference measurement in the field. And again, we're thinking probably the combined heart rate and sensing as being a bit closer to a true reference than for MVPA. So that's currently where our thoughts are at on that. But it still doesn't mean that the current project here is not helpful or informative, because there's such a huge challenge around the harmonization, and that this project is still, I think, really, really exciting.
Just a comment about using combined heart rate and movement sensing as the criterion. I think that would be quite good, because then you can actually calculate physical activity energy expenditure from the combined sensing, which could then be translated into the absolute MET values, which you want to use for classifying moderate and vigorous 3 and 6 METs.
Yeah.
So I think that's a good approach. Yeah.
And I guess the individual calibration then is the tricky part we've thought of for like participant adherence, etc. on that. But we'd love to learn.
But I think Søren and company have quite a lot of data in Cambridge on that.
Oh yeah, yes. And we are reaching out to him on that.
Just to build on Anders' question, do you believe it is a possibility to model how a hip monitor would act based on the wrist monitors? So that, for example, if the ungKan study ever move on to wrist data, that you could yet compare it to the previous hip data based on the new data?
Yes. So I think that is hugely valuable, and it is just thinking of the WHO hat on then, or they're trying to make a recommendation to the minister in Botswana, then they're probably going to recommend a wrist one for pragmatism on that. And we're imagining the minister in Botswana probably will not care of or have the curiosity to say, oh, how might it have compared to if I had a hip-based measurement? He's probably then just looking for a number as to how many people in my population meet MVPA guidelines, and I want to use something that seems somewhat defensible as a method from that. So I think with the Waze work, it's very much, can we recommend an algorithm that you could use now today, and it's not going to be the definitive forever method, but at least the country, if it's going to all the work of collecting the data, doesn't want to wait 5 years for us as scientists to figure out which methods they should use. Can we recommend to them one today to use?
Excellent. Do we have any additional questions or comments? Sure. Still have 5 minutes.
Thank you for all the great talks. I was wondering, I use wrist accelerometers in a clinical study, and a concern from patients or people that are used to hip monitors is that the wrist produces much more noise. And with the cut points approach, I can get their point, but with the new machine learning algorithms and initial data cleaning steps, is this still a valid concern, or how much does the noise influence the?
There's certainly no doubt that the wrist is probably the worst of the major locations for accurate measurement of physical activity intensities, behaviors and traits, compared to hip or compared to thigh. But my reading of the the head-to-head studies where you have people wearing all three against some reference measurement is that certainly hip, probably followed by thigh, are better than the wrist, but by just maybe a few percentage points, so maybe a 85 versus an 81% accuracy or thereabouts. But then I guess when we see at least within epidemiological studies, then the compliance for the wrist is almost like a completely different scale to the compliance you get certainly with the hip. The thigh actually has got good compliance. So I feel comfortable, that the wrist is not as good as the other locations, but from my reading of current validation studies, the methods that we have at present for certainly step count, sedentary behavior assessment, the performance I think is really quite good, not perfect, but I think certainly good enough for surveillance and good enough for downstream epidemiological analysis, and I would feel quite comfortable using it in a clinical setting as well for those measurements. And I said we're just, I think, trying to work on that MVPA assessment from the wrist, just to be a bit more confident within it. But I feel, I think, quite comfortable. And then I guess industry innovation is essentially it's the wrist or the ring are the main device locations at the minute, and the likes of Apple and Google are having thousands of engineers working on this. We'd like them to be a little bit more open and transparent in the methods that they use. But I think it naturally draws in lots of students, etc., then who want to innovate in this space. So I feel quite comfortable with the wrist as being a good measurement of choice. But again, I'm not mandating that everyone else should use wrist in their studies. I see for Justin and his, your line on 20 years of amazing trends data, you wouldn't want to move away from the hip there on that. And similarly in Canada. So I think it, again, is context specific for any given clinical study or a surveillance setup or epidemiological study.
Okay, I think we may have come to a close, and I would just take the opportunity to thank all the speakers today, Bjørge, who started up, Ole and Johan, who continued with presenting their ongoing stuff. Aidan gave a brilliant keynote, Atle, who provided very interesting information about the work you are doing in Hunt. I would like to see us all come together with all this amount of data we have. And I mean, I've been fortunate to work in large consortia, and I think we have the opportunity to expand even further and do even better work to really understand the importance of physical activity for population health. And I suppose that's the work we have ahead of us, all of us, and especially what we want to do in our new research center and as a WHO collaborating center. We really need to, or want to understand even further how physical activity contributes to health in populations and in individuals, and advance the science to inform public health for the good of all. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you very much for taking part in the discussions. And again, special thanks to Joanna who left and Aidan who have traveled to come here. We have really very much enjoyed your contribution to this opening of our research center. Thank you very much.
Vi syns egentlig liksom man skulle hatt